Dear Divine Ones, this is lesson number 13. A meaningless world engenders fear. Today's idea is really another form of the preceding one, except that it is more specific as to the emotion aroused. Actually, a meaningless world is impossible. Nothing without meaning exists. However, it does not follow that you will not think you perceive something that has no meaning. On the contrary, you will be particularly likely to think you do perceive it. Recognition of meaninglessness arouses intense anxiety in all the separated ones. It represents a situation in which God and the ego challenge each other as to whose meaning is to be written in the empty space that meaninglessness provides. The ego rushes in frantically to establish its own ideas there, fearful that the void may otherwise be used to demonstrate its own impotence and unreality. And on this alone it is correct. It is essential, therefore, that you learn to recognize the meaninglessness and accept it without fear. If you are fearful, it is certain that you will endow the world with attributes that it does not possess and crowd it with images that do not exist. To the ego, illusions are safety devices, as they must also be to you who equate yourself with the ego. The exercises for today, which should be done about 3 or 4 times for not more than a minute or so at most each time, are to be practiced in a somewhat different way from the preceding ones. With eyes closed, repeat today's idea to yourself. Then open your eyes and look about you slowly. With eyes closed, repeat today's idea to yourself. A meaningless world engenders fear. Then open your eyes and look about you slowly, saying, I am looking at a meaningless world. Repeat this statement to yourself as you look about. Then close your eyes and conclude. So let's look about. I'm looking at a meaningless world. Then closing your eyes. A meaningless world engenders fear because I think I am in competition with God. You may find it difficult to avoid resistance in one form or another to this concluding statement. Whatever form such resistance may take, remind yourself that you are really afraid of such a thought because of the vengeance of the enemy. You are not expected to believe the statement at this point and will probably dismiss it as preposterous. Note carefully, however, any signs of overt or covert fear which it may arouse. This is our first attempt at stating an explicit cause and effect relationship of a kind which you are very inexperienced in recognizing. Do not dwell on the concluding statement and try not even to think of it except during the practice periods. That will suffice at present. A meaningless world engenders fear. A meaningless world engenders fear, and that is not my purpose. And inhaling and exhaling. So we're retraining ourselves again to follow the wisdom of divine or Holy Spirit, your inner guidance that always brings you back to love, whatever that name is that you want to call it. And so we have to catch when the ego wants to rush in, and when the ego is whispering fear, because the ego's voice is much louder and clearer. And so we have to start training our minds to listen to the quiet underneath, the quieter voice underneath all the noise that the ego makes, because the ego is trying to cling to its world and its identity, right? So if you start to listen and you start to look through the meaninglessness that the ego wants to rush in and give its meaning to, then the ego feels afraid, right? Because it only can exist if you believe that you are separate from God. So its whole existence is an illusion. But we have all this fear and guilt and shame even associated with having this ego, this separated self, because we believe that it's in competition with our divine self, which in a way that only works in the ego's world. We're not in competition with anything because we're part of the great oneness of all. Can't be in competition with that. If we are divine, who are we in competition with? So see if you can just practice this idea, whether it makes sense or not, and just contemplate what it would be like to let go of our identity as separated selves. And this lesson reminds me of that incredible poem by Marianne Williamson, that our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate, but how powerful I'm paraphrasing, but how powerful, how magnificent, how loved we are, our great light. So begin to contemplate that it's not all the fear and guilt and shame that we're really afraid of, because none of that is real. We're afraid that if we look beyond, that the ego will lose its identity and we'll see that it's nothing. But then we'll have to accept how magnificent, how amazing, how loving we are. I look forward to being with you again tomorrow.